I want to start with a question. What do you do when the life that you're expected to live doesn't match the life that you feel inside you? I'm sure many of you have this question in your hearts every day that you wake up in the morning. For me, that question wasn't philosophical. It was deeply, deeply personal. There's a flower that has fascinated artists, poets, and thinkers for centuries. It's the lotus, most commonly referred to as kaval in Urdu. So as an artist and as someone who has always dreamed beyond the confines of what is acceptable and against what you have always been conditioned to believe, I witnessed my journey much like that of a lotus, against the norm, growing in muddy waters, in places that feel heavy, unclear, almost against beauty. And yet, it rises above it all and just blooms anyway. And that is the kind of resilience I want you all to develop. The drive that urges you to bloom, despite everything, despite any condition. Not waiting for life to become easier, no guarantees, just growing. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you have to develop Hulk-like tendencies and throw fits and whatnot. Please don't throw fits. On the contrary, I wish for you to find strength in being tender and kind. And I've often wondered, what would happen if we actually lived a little more like that? More like a lotus, growing in all conditions, regardless. Not fitting into a world that was never even designed for you to feel free. So I grew up in a very strict environment. Creativity and self-expression weren't encouraged. Art could never be my future. It was just seen as something you do until real life begins. And as a woman, your path was not something you discovered. It was something already decided for you. Questioning wasn't curiosity, it was forbidden. Art was never supposed to be my destination, but it was always my zaban, my language. When I painted, something shifted. I felt something I could not explain. Freedom, expression, identity. For the first time, I felt azadi. A space where I didn't have to ask for permission, where I didn't have to explain myself, it was a place where I could exist fully without permission. But choosing art meant choosing resistance. It meant going against everything I was told was right. It meant disappointing expectations. And that is a huge deal because we always grew up trying to please our parents. One of the biggest turning points in my life came when I made a decision that changed everything. I enrolled in art school. Not with support, not with encouragement, but with doubt surrounding me. There was silence. Then there were questions about my choices, my future, my worth, even my place in heaven. But I held on to one thing, my belief in what I could become. And then something happened. I got in on merit, and not only that, I was awarded a scholarship. So for the first time, I realized my passion wasn't just something I believed in, it was proving to be my spark. That's my spark. Resilience. Because sabr or himmat is not always loud, it's quiet. It is the will to go on when no one is clapping for you, especially when no one is clapping for you. I continued one painting at a time, one project at a time, building something from nothing. And then came a moment I will never forget. After my first art exhibition, I made a decision that felt natural to me. I gave all my earnings to the house help so they could fulfill their lifelong dream of going for Hajj, pilgrimage. To me, it was simple. It felt like gratitude. It felt right. But when people found out, there was judgment. I was shamed. I was told that the money came from something sinful, that the art which I had built with so much sincerity was considered forbidden by some, not acceptable. And then suddenly something that came from kindness was turned into something I was made to feel ashamed of. And for a moment, I did. I felt small, questioned, confused. But then I realized something powerful. When you choose a path that is different, people don't just question your choices, they question your intentions. That is the power of stigma. It's not about what you believe, it is about what you've been conditioned to believe. Nothing can control us the way shame and guilt can. A powerful ideology controlling generations of family systems. So in that moment, I had to decide. Do I shrink to fit their understanding, or do I stand firm in mine? Face the fear of judgment. How often do we stop and question the things we've been taught to believe? Because resilience, it is not just about pushing through struggle, it is about holding on to your truth, even when it is misunderstood. I continued, and along the way, I began to notice something. Resilience is everywhere around us. Like a painting, layer by layer, your journey becomes your story. Not because the road is easy, but because the artist refuses to leave it ordinary. That is hunar. It's innate, it's inherent. It's the courage to create meaning where none is given. But here's what I didn't expect. Even if you start alone, you don't stay alone. Slowly, something else began to change. People started connecting with my work. They saw something in it. Emotion, honesty, truth, and those connections grew. Because art does something powerful. It speaks where words fail. It connects people who may never even share the same language, but they can share the same feeling. Through my work as a painter and an interior designer, I realized I wasn't just creating visuals or spaces. I was creating experiences. I was helping people express themselves through their spaces. Spaces not designed for someone else's personality. Spaces where people could feel seen, understood, connected. And in a world that often feels divided, that kind of connection is powerful. But perhaps the most important shift of all was internal. Because when you grow up being told what you can't do, believing in what you can do becomes an act of courage. Confidence in yourself, igniting the biggest spark of all, the spark of possibility. I had to unlearn limits that were never truly mine. I had to challenge the idea that I must do what everyone expects of me. That passion isn't practical. That success only comes in one acceptable form. So I started asking a different question. What if it is possible? What if your passion is your purpose? What if your difference is your strength? What if the path that no one understands is exactly the one you're meant to take? Because every meaningful change, every breakthrough, every story of courage begins with someone daring to believe in possibility. Today I stand here not because everything was easy, not because I had support from the beginning, but because I chose not to let that stop me. Because I chose to follow a spark that didn't make sense to anyone else, but meant everything to me. So if you're standing at that edge, feeling unseen, unheard, uncertain, that beautiful, quiet, but underconfident inner child asking to be seen, remember this. You don't need permission to begin. You don't need validation to continue. And you don't need to have everything figured out to move forward. All you need is one spark, a small belief, a quiet decision, a moment where you choose yourself, because that spark, your spark, is like the lotus. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It doesn't need clear water to bloom. It blooms anyway. And when it does, it doesn't just change its own story, it reminds everyone else that they can bloom too. So I urge you to ask yourself, if you were a lotus, tender, fierce, and resilient, what could you not achieve? Thank you.